So hello, namaste and Hare Krishna. This is Kripamai Das with talk 4 in the series of 10 teachings of Bhakti. And this talk is about the Guru and the Sampradaya. Well, the Guru is a word that needs some unpacking, needs some explaining, because we in the West, usually we don't have things called gurus in Western culture. We have vicars, we have rabbis, we have coaches, we have school teachers, we have psychotherapists, we have all different types of transactional teaching figures in our life. But the Eastern figure of the Guru is what we might call uncommon for us. It needs unpacking. Sometimes we're not sure if we need a Guru, and we think that if we do need a Guru, how much do I allow them into my life? How much power do I give away in order to receive what one is traditionally expecting from the Guru? But when we encounter the Vedic tradition, we also encounter an absolute need to accept the figure of the Guru. Whether the Guru is a lowly, humble servant or a master of the craft of enlightenment, that Guru is an absolute necessity according to the Vedic tradition. So last week we we shared some of the quotations from the ancient Vedas about how important the figure of the Guru is. For instance, Acharyavan Purusho Veda from the Chandogya Upanishad, which we will be looking at tonight. One who has a Guru or an Acharya knows things as they are. And we come to the famous one in Mundaka Upanishad, the Tadvigartam Sagurum Ivabhigachet. To understand transcendental knowledge, one must certainly approach a Guru. And then in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Yasya Deve Para Bhaktir, etc. So that brings us to, of course, the Gita Upanishad, in which we have the famous verse, chapter 4, verse 34, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena. So Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, who seems to have a Guru with him in the form of Krishna himself, but even then Krishna says, no, even though I'm God and I'm sitting on your chariot, you must have a Guru in order to understand things. So why? Well, Krishna says you have to ask relevant questions. Pariprashna. Prashna is a question. Pari means all around, like the perimeter. You have to ask questions all around the subject and shed light from all angles of vision until you fully understand. So what exactly is a Guru? Well, I'm dealing with an enlightened viewership at the moment. They may know, or they may want some further enlightening. But Guru, of course, is a teacher. And you can have a Guru for anything. You can have a pottery Guru, or a cloth Guru, a paper-making Guru. You can have a Guru in finance, a Guru in military arts, Guru in architecture. But the most important Guru, and therefore the one who gets the title of Guru most and gets the most questions, is the Guru who knows how to be happy, how to get rid of all unhappiness, and how to approach the position of all bliss, all enlightenment. The word Guru actually means heavy, one who is heavy with knowledge, not one who is lagu or lightweight. We don't want a lightweight if we're trying to solve the problems in life. We don't want someone who's just a little bit informed. We want someone who's fully informed, not someone who's lightweight. And it also means someone whose knowledge that he supposedly has is revealed in his behavior, and therefore Arjuna asks Krishna, well, you're talking about enlightened beings and gurus and saints and yogis. You say, but how does he walk? How does he talk? And then Krishna begins to describe the symptoms. So that sort of person is what we're looking for. So, or not. We may not be looking for such a person. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was once asked whether a guru is for everyone. And his young students presumed that he would say yes. He said, no, guru is not for everyone. It is only if you want to solve the main problems of life. The main problem of life being the cycle of birth and death. If you want to solve that problem, you need a guru. If not, don't bother. So somebody who knows a lot may not necessarily share it with others. And that's all right. He may just keep it to himself. But if a person doesn't want to be a guru, but if he's shunning what is known as gurutva, meaning guru-ness, but he happens to give grace to someone by sharing some teaching with them, then in the person's eyes he becomes guru. So guru is in the eye of the beholder and in the function that the person performs. In the Vedas, in the Vedic tradition of ancient India, it was forbidden to gain knowledge without having a guru. It was seen to be impolite, untraditional, but it was also seen to be dangerous. And we have a saying, don't we, that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And so it is. If you think that you know something, you're a very dangerous person. If, however, you have cultivated humility and you understand that you know very little, but my teacher, he knows a lot, then there's a tendency not to make great mistakes. So there's cultivation of humility at the same time as having a teacher to fill your mind with knowledge. These two things are in balance. So there's an old shloka, and I will read it because it pops up in different forms in different ways. Achinoti hi shastraratam acharyapasanat nara acharya stapayatyapi natu pushtakamadrita. A person grasps the meaning, the true meaning of Shastra or sacred scripture through service to a teacher. The teacher also establishes him in right conduct, not merely through books, which is interesting. So this concept of having a book which you can read, which is filled with knowledge, and a teacher to teach you that knowledge and establish you in the conduct, are seen as balancing things. And of course, in the olden days, the ultimate tradition before the dawn of printing was that the guru or teacher would convey to you mantras, and those mantras would be explaining knowledge to you. There would be shortcuts to knowledge. In other words, it would be whatever subject you were teaching, there was a mantra to not only help you understand, but a mantra that would remain imprinted in your memory throughout your life, whether it was medicine or architecture or mathematics or art or indeed the science of self-realization. So each student, rather than opening a book, would begin a course wherein he or she would sit before the teacher, and the teacher would recite a short phrase, the disciple would repeat it, and then the teacher would repeat it again, and they'd do that 10 times and move on to the next text. So what sort of person were they looking for? Well, an acharya, or a person who is teaching by example, must be well versed in a system of thought, very well versed. They must have committed a lot to memory themselves, achinoti hi shastrartam. They must do it practically themselves. And for a teacher to prove themselves to be a genuine teacher, they should be able to create within their student the aptitude for learning, the full perfection of learning, and the implementation of learning in practical activity. If a teacher produces only dull students, then the fault lies with him. He's not a good teacher. If he produces sharp students who learn things but can't put them into practice, the blame then comes to the teacher as well. So someone who's proficient in a subject but may not teach it is known as a vidvan. And one whose life is based on that subject but doesn't teach it to anyone is known as an anushtata. If he's got realization of the subject that he teaches, he's called anubhavi. But someone who teaches but doesn't yet practice as an example in his own life is known as a pracharaka. So an acharya, or the teacher that the student on the spiritual path is looking for, is one who has all three: anushtata, anubhavi, and pracharaka. But if you thought that the teacher was going to get all the blame and all the credit for the profit of the disciple, then you are mistaken, because the disciple or pupil or student also has to be very much qualified. So what is this? What is the student? What is the disciple? It's interesting. The etymology of words allows us to understand, even in the Western context, what was going on and universally between the guru and the teacher and the student. For instance, the word pupil. Pupil means a student. I'm reading, of course, my notes. It comes from the Latin pupillus, which means male, or pupilla, a female. And it means an orphan, or a ward, or a minor under guardianship, because a child is someone who's, we say, don't we, when we send children to school, we say in loco parentis, that the teacher is in place of the parent. So pupil means student. Interestingly, we have pupil of the eye, and that was because when you looked into someone's eyes, you would see a tiny version of that person in the eye of the person. So that also became the pupil. You're seeing a little boy or a little girl in the eye. So pupil means a learner, and disciple or discipulus is not a Vedic term, of course, it's a Latin term. There's a great relationship between disciple or discipulus and discipline. And it means, discipulus, it means a learner. And because learners had to be subjected to some form of discipline, in other words, sit here, don't move, and listen to the lesson, that's a discipline. Or you can have your break time when the bell rings, that's a discipline. You can't just do what you wish to do. The teacher is now in control of your life, that's a discipline. So learning and discipline, they came to have related meanings. So a disciple then was a person who was not just a person who was learning dry knowledge, but who was being disciplined or controlled by a teacher. And that sense is very strong in the early monastery or in the early followers of Jesus. For instance, whether Jesus called them disciples or not, we don't know. Well, he wouldn't have done, I don't think. So a disciple, the word disciple feels stronger than a student because it means a person who learns from a person, not just to learn a subject. It's rather like if you go to Oxford University, you don't just learn a subject, you get tutored in that subject. The Oxford tutorial system is the envy of the world, and it means that as an Oxford student you can go and meet with a PhD who's the teacher, the expert, absolute expert in that field of knowledge, and for an hour you can sit with them individual tuition. Now the Vedic word, the Sanskrit word, is shishya. Shishya is a disciple. And shishya is also related to the word shasana, which means discipline. So all these words are related. So what is a traditional disciple? And the reason we're studying this, of course, is because this is the first principle of Bhaktivinoda's 10 principles. He's talking about amnaya, the spiritual tradition from which we gain true knowledge, separating true knowledge from that which is false, the reality from illusion. He says it's possible if you study Shastra, because you're limited, you have to appeal to Shastra or Holy Scripture, sacred texts. But you also need a guru to make that complete. Just like sometimes you get special, or builders get a special type of glue. It comes in 2 tubes, and you squeeze one glue onto a flat surface, then you squeeze another glue, then you mix them together. Only when you've mixed together those 2 substances do you get the super bond, super glue that you want. So it's like that. Shastra plus the shasanam, or discipline of the guru, both things will make the super glue the Vedas into your mind. So traditionally, a disciple, a seriously inquisitive disciple, although there were many variations, but the traditional path of a student and guru, which is what we're talking about, the student would go to school, and a Vedic student would begin school around 5 or 6, like we do today, and you'd go to a special school for your subject. Sometimes, of course, your guru would be your father or your uncle, your mother, like that, if it was more of a domestic knowledge that you were interested in. But one who wants to be a Brahmin, one who wants to be a Vaishnava, one who wants to be in their life rising above the true problems of life, which is old age, disease and death, and breaking free from the cycle of reincarnation, that person goes to a particular type of guru who will teach the secret message of the Vedas about the soul. So that's the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, functioning as the guru, he gets straight into telling Arjuna that you're wasting time, you've made a great mistake, you're upset about something that you should not be upset about. Let me tell you about the soul. So he gets straight into it. So that sort of guru, who represents that tradition, a young disciple would go at the age of 6, and sometimes they would be initiated very quickly thereafter. The age of 6, the age of 8, you'd receive your what is known as Upanishads, the Gayatri mantra, and you'd begin to study the Vedas. Now each guru teaches a portion of the Vedas. Some teacher might be an expert in the Chandogya Upanishad. That is 680 verses in the Chandogya Upanishad, so you'd learn something of that. And in the afternoon you might do learning how to do fire yagyas, because you would do something as a child that would give you some income after you left the school. The school was known as the place of the guru, or the Gurukula, and ideally you would learn something that would help you in your future life. So most things a Brahmin is somewhat poverty-stricken, but he can be called upon to perform various religious rituals, and people will reward him with a small amount, usually. So in that way he can survive. He cultivates humility and simplicity and all those good qualities, but he's very strong in his understanding. Now traditionally the guru would be a married man, living in the forest maybe, or away from the hustle and bustle of life. Why not a sannyasi? Well, because the sannyasi is always traveling. he's got no time to sit down and teach anybody anything. He's here today and he's gone tomorrow. A sannyasi, at least a classical sannyasi, can only stay in a town for 3 days, a big city for 5 days, and then he has to keep on moving. That's his ashram. So they wouldn't become teachers, because teaching requires teaching every day to young people and for a long period of time. Now the discipline for a young person is different different from the discipline for someone who is approaching the Guru after the age of, say, 20 or something like that. Why? Because children require discipline. I was in a home yesterday, and one of the children was in a school that is said to be the most toughest school in the country. It's a London school where the children are very highly regimented, very highly disciplined, but they get good results. So in a traditional ashram, the child would be called to eat, so the Guru would teach and his wife would cook for the children, or teenagers, however old they happen to be. And the rule was that if the Guru didn't call you to eat, then you had to fast. So you would be disciplined like that. And there was different things you had to do, take a cold bath, etc. But obviously this does not apply to someone who's 25 or 30 and seeking the absolute truth from such a Guru. But the rules are tough in the ashram. You would spend 6 months learning new verses, and the remaining 6 months you would recite them. So the first 6 months of the year, new knowledge, and then recite them until you'd learn them perfectly. The idea was you recited them backwards and forwards until you could fully recite them with no prompting and no further help. So many of these Guru-Sisya or Guru-disciple, teacher-disciple transactions are given to us in the Upanishads, and I wanted just to spend a few minutes talking about them, because they're very enlightening. So the Upanishads, as we've discussed previously, are texts that help you understand that you're not the body, but you're the soul, and what is Brahman, what is the relationship, etc. So I've chosen 6 illustrative stories from the Upanishads. The first one is from the Chandogya Upanishad, and it concerns a father who was a guru himself, who had a young boy, Shwetaketu. The father's name was Uddalaka. And the boy went away to an ashram, and he came back after 12 years. And the problem was that the boy knew a lot, but he was very proud, and the father could pick up on the pride of the young boy. And he had to challenge him. He said, what is the use of you learning all these things where you haven't actually understood the most important thing? So he gives them various examples, and he tries to help them to understand what is the highest reality, the common reality of which we are a part. One of the difficulties is that for the embodied being, we see the difference in all things, whereas the enlightened sage sees the commonality in all living beings, nay, in all matter, sees that it's all just different forms of the supreme spiritual reality known as Brahman. So he says that consider gold. He said gold appears in different ways in this world, in earrings and bangles and bracelets and rings. He said, but it is all from the one source, the one stock of gold that is in the ground. It simply becomes transformed into these different objects, but gold is one. And he says that a famous example, which I've somewhat dramatized in something which was on the Chakram album. He says he asks his son Shwetaketu to put salt into water, and then after it's dissolved, to see where the salt is gone. And of course the boy says, the salt, I can't see the salt, it's invisible. And his father replies that, well, something which is invisible is still real. So Brahman is all around us, through us, in us, inside us, outside us. It is real, although invisible. So in this way, by a series of examples, he's trying to get his son to understand the knowledge that pride has prevented him from seeing. Next point. He says, a vast tree arises from a tiny seed whose inner essence cannot be seen. From that unseen principle comes the entire visible form. So the vast tree comes from a tiny seed, a variegated trunk and branches and great limbs and twigs and leaves and flowers and fruit. It all comes from a tiny seed. So in the same way, everything that you see around you, all the different forms and objects and colors, sensations, heat, cold, dryness, wetness, liquidity, gases, everything comes from Brahman. It comes from the seed, substrate of reality. And from this we find the line, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, that I mentioned at the top. And the great teaching coming from this Upanishad is Tattvam Asi, thou art that, you are that. That's so the point of this exercise, the dialogue between Uddalaka and Shwetaketu, is knowing the underlying reality behind all things. So then the Mundaka Upanishad takes us somewhere else. Previously we saw a young boy who was going off to the ashram and coming home. Now we see someone called Shaunaka. Shaunaka going to his guru Angiras. And Shaunaka is a respected and wealthy householder. So he's not in the ashram, he's not a young boy. He's a wealthy man, he's got his family. And he comes, and despite his wealth and success, he lacks ultimate understanding, so he asks a single profound question. Here's the question that he asks the Guru Angiras. He said, what is that, knowing which everything becomes known? So Angiras doesn't, like Lord Krishna, he doesn't begin explaining with Atma Tattva, but he explains the difference between, he reframes the entire landscape of knowledge, dividing it into lower knowledge and higher knowledge. So the lower knowledge is something like how to make a brick. Higher knowledge is something how to escape the wheel of birth and death. So only after establishing that distinction does he then get on to Atma. And the famous example that he uses, that we use up until this day, Prabhupada used also, is the spider and the web. He said, consider the spider. The spider spins the web, and the silken strands come from within the spider's body, manifests an entire web. Entire web is manifest. And then when it wants, the spider takes all of this back into its body, if it wishes. So in the same way, just like that spider, Brahman, or God, manifests everything in this world and withdraws it back within himself. Another example, that as countless sparks arise from a single fire and share its nature, so all beings arise from Brahman and are of the same essence, though appearing as many. So the essence is the same, of course, for the Vaishnava understanding, we are very small Brahman. We are sparks from the fire. We share in the quality of fire, but not the quantity. This is the difference. So this narrative emphasizes Shaunaka's deliberate approach to a teacher. He really wants to know. And the first thing the teacher teaches him is the limit of his knowledge. Don't mind if the teacher, the guru, reveals to you your limit of knowledge, and don't be surprised if it's very little, because the point is that you're going to the guru in order to learn. So traditionally the guru would tell you something or show you something that highlighted how much you needed to learn. In the Katha Upanishad, we have a nice story about Nachiketa, famous story actually. Nachiketa and the god of death, Yamaraj. Yamaraj is the god of death who judges everyone just after they leave this world. Anyway, the story is that Nachiketa went with his father to a Vedic ritual, and there was some giving of cows, but the cows were very skinny, and Nachiketa, sort of a proud boy, he laughed at this and he said, "Father," he said, what are you going to give?" He said, "Are you going to give skinny cows like this?" Saying in jest that it wasn't a great gift. It wasn't a great gift to give such a poor-looking cow. That a true religious ceremony should be where we give things with a generous heart. So you don't give a broken drum. It's a drum, yes, but it's broken. So it's you don't give a cow that can't give milk. You don't give a fruit that's too old, etc. like that. So he asked his father 3 times, and the father became annoyed, and he said, "I'll give you to hell. That's where I'll give you. I'll give you, and I'll give you to hell." And so Nachiketa, he took this very seriously, and he travels to the realm of Yamaraj. And when he arrives in hell, there's a problem. Yamaraj, you see, in hell, it's not the devil in hell. We don't have a devil, in Vedic culture. We do have Yamaraj. He's a judge, but he's not evil. He's a servant of the Lord. So Yamaraj is absent. He's not there for another 3 days, during which time Nachiketa fasts. And eventually Yamaraj comes, and he's a little bit sorry. He's very apologetic. He says, "I'm sorry that you're a Brahmin boy, but you've been standing here waiting without anything to eat for 3 days. How can I make it up to you? Let me give you a boon," those famous boons, a boon for every day that you've been standing here. So he says, "What will I give you as the first boon?" And the first boon is that Nachiketa wants to be reconciled with his father. He wants his father's anger to be turned into love. And Yamaraj raises his hand and says, "Tatastu," or it'll happen. And this re-establishes the family harmony eventually. So then the second boon, he says, "I want the knowledge of how to perform sacrifices and rituals perfectly." Yamaraj waves his hand. He says, "What would you like for the third boon?" He says, "Well, I like knowledge of what happens after death. I'm in the right place to know. You're the right person to teach me. So please help me understand what happens after death." Surprisingly then, Yamaraj says, "I'm sorry. Ask me anything else. That's secret knowledge." And then he says, "Let me give you a chariot. I'll give you a golden chariot with bags of rubies in the back, and diamonds, and gold and silver." "No, I don't want that," says Nachiketa. "Well, let me give you land and princesses at least let me do that for you. He says, no, I don't want that. So he offers him wealth, power, pleasure. He says, well, let me give you a very long life so that you don't have to worry about what happens after death, because you'll hardly die. You'll just drift in your final moments after hundreds of years. Nachiketa says, no, tell me that secret knowledge. So then eventually Yamaraj teaches him the difference between something called prayas, which is pleasant life, pleasures, and shreyas, which is the good, the ultimate good. Things which are pleasurable and things which are good. He tells them the distinction between those things. And he tells them the nature of the Atma, the inner self, which is craving the good, but is having to make do with the prayas, or the short-term pleasurable. And he tells them that self-knowledge, or real immortality, comes not from riches and wealth, neither does it come from even Vedic sacrifices, but it comes from knowledge of the Atma, knowledge of the self. So Nachiketa goes home, and of course he's reconciled with his father, and we get to learn the story thousands of years later. Are you alright so far? In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we have a beautiful story of a great sage or guru called Yajnavalkya, who has two wives, Katyayani and Maitreyi. And although he's not a sannyasi, obviously because he's got two wives, he does at the end of his life want to go off wandering and be free. This is also part of the Vedic culture. So he says, calls his wives and says, during my life as a guru, I've been given wealth, and I'm now going to divide the wealth 50-50 between you. Katyayani says, thank you very much, my lord, my dear husband. I'm sorry to see you go, but I accept everything with open arms, and I respect you for it. Thank you. And she walks off. And then Maitreyi comes, and she says, if I were to possess the whole earth filled with wealth, would that make me immortal? And Yajnavalkya is astonished by this, and he says, wealth cannot give comfort and status. Wealth may give comfort and status, but it cannot grant immortality. Then Maitreyi says, well, what's the use? Even the wealth that you're going to give me, I love you for it, but it doesn't mean anything to me because it doesn't give me immortality. So then the husband then becomes the guru of the wife, and he teaches, but what he teaches her is not really comforting for her. He says that he challenges all her ordinary assumptions about the relationship between husband and wife and the values and the meanings. He says a husband is not loved for his own sake, nor a wife, children, wealth, or gods. All are loved for the sake of the spiritual soul. So in order to grasp the understanding of the spiritual soul, you have to go through ordinary perception. And he teaches her a path of what's called neti-neti. Neti-neti means not this, not this, not this, not this, not this. The soul is not this, the soul is not that. The soul is not this, the soul is not that. And he lists everything that the soul is not. And in this way, she comes to an understanding of what the soul actually is. And what makes this story distinctive is that there's no other teachings going on. There's no austerity, there's no test of obedience, because she's already done that. She's a loving wife. There's no parables. And like the story of Shvetaketu, it's dismantling surface understanding, but in a slightly more abstract way. In the Prashna Upanishad, and I am coming to a close very soon, there are 6 people who approach Pipalad, and they want deep metaphysical questions answered. But Pipalad imposes a condition. He says, you live with me for a year, and after a year, you can ask me one question each. He said, but in a particular order. So each by then disciple gets to ask one question a year, whether it was 6 years or 1 year, I can't remember, but he asks these questions can only be asked in a fixed order. So Katyayana says, from where did all beings come? That's the question, and he speaks on that. Bhargava says, what powers sustain a human being? How does the heart beat? How do the lungs move? Which power within us is supreme? Kaushalya says, where does prana come from? Where does prana come from? How does it enter the body? And how does it divide into the pranas that perform different functions within? Suryayani says, what happens when a person sleeps, dreams, and then wakes up? What's going on there? What happens to our consciousness? Does the consciousness disappear? If the consciousness is superior to the body, where does it go? Why is it controlled? What happens to the prana? Satyakama, who has another story dedicated to him, which is very interesting, but we won't tell that now. He talks about what is gained by meditating on the word Om. And you'll notice that these questions are in a hierarchy. And finally, Shaibya says, who is the inner person? So now we're getting to the point of the Atma. All right, well, that was interesting. So the point of these 6 students and Pipalad is that it talks about the benefits of gradual instruction, something that unfolds over time within the context of a disciplined teacher-student relationship. Now, the sum total of all those guru-disciple relationships is called the sampradaya, or rather the sampradaya means sam means complete, and pra means going forward, and da means giving knowledge, the knowledge that goes forward. So it's the teacher-student, where the student then becomes a teacher and teaches a student, who then becomes a teacher and teaches a student. This mechanism is called parampara, but the whole thing is known as sampradaya, and it's a living tradition, and therefore the idea is that unchanging messages are given no matter where we may find ourselves in history, in human history. The Vedas will remain the same because the student has taught them faithfully to the disciple. So the Sampradaya is a community of dedicated practitioners who are teaching knowledge to others. It also means school, or what we may contact in the here and now. So Siddhanta is the Siddha Anta, the purified end, the perfect end of knowledge that's taught, as well as Sadachara. Sad means eternal, or blessed, or divine. Achara means behavior. So as well as Siddhanta, there will be Sadachara. These two things are taught. How to act properly, and what the truth is. And initiation is that which begins the teaching of knowledge between the teacher and the student. Occasionally, a sampradaya is revived by a great teacher. Even Krishna says, from time to time, I appear in this world because the knowledge has been lost. So sometimes knowledge becomes weakened, and the great acharyas have to revive it by rejuvenating the teaching and the lineage in some way. And in the context of the Vaishnava Sampradayas, the Vaishnava lineage, there are 4 Vaishnava lines. They all descend from divine persons such as Lakshmi, Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and the 4 Kumaras, and their extent. Even today you can find the lineages that are teaching. And this Amnaya tradition, this Shastra plus Guru, gives us a balanced understanding of not only the content of knowledge, but how to practice it. And in this way we move forward in our spiritual life. That's the conclusion of talk number 4, where we talk about Guru-disciple tradition and Sampradaya.